Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Shannon Show. So, as you can tell from the title and the thumbnail, this is a video talking about how I've been redefining my yearly reading challenge, my yearly book challenge. And this is kind of following, it is in the same vein following the video I did back in September of last year, 2025, where I was talking about how I was redefining my TBR pile and how I personally see my TBR pile. And since I've kind of been doing the same, similar thing, something similar with my yearly reading challenge, in the sense of redefining my yearly reading challenge, I figured I'd go over with you how I'm personally doing that. And I have the basic ideas, the basic overarching ideas down below in this description. I will be talking about them in more detail in this video, but if you just want to take a look at how exactly I'm looking over it, how exactly I'm redefining it, if you want to just see the general ideas, that's down below in the description, as well as the link to the how I'm redefining my TBR pile video. That's also down below in the description. Sorry, I keep pausing and going. But with all of that said, let's get into this video. So first things first, this is not something I don't view the yearly reading challenge as something I succeed or I fail at. If I hit that marker, if I hit whatever number of books I've set for the year, that's great, but it's not something and that is, I guess, some sort of success. But if I don't reach that, that's not necessarily something that I've failed to do or that I failed at. So it's if I do it, that's great and I'm happy about that. But at the same time, it's there's no pressure one way or the other. I'm not putting pressure on myself to try to meet that. I'm not putting pressure on myself to not try to meet it. It's just, if I meet it, I do. If I don't, I don't. And then the second thing is, at the start of the year, is I base it on how the previous year went. So let me just take a look at something real quick, just because I want to double check how many books I've set for this year specifically, for 2026. Because in 2025, I did not meet my yearly reading challenge, which was 95 bucks. And then for 2026, okay, I was right. I was thinking 90. For 2026, I've set 90. And so I base it off the previous year, not just based on whether or not I accomplished the actual reading challenge, but I also base it off of the vibes of the previous year, what else I was doing, if reading was one of my stronger hobbies, especially kind of towards the end of the year, because end of the year stuff will impact how the beginning of the year starts, at least for me. So let's take 2025 into 2026, for example. I did not meet my 2025 yearly reading challenge. I have that number down below in the description, and of how many I actually read for 2025. So I did not meet my 2025 reading challenge, so I knocked it down to 90. And that number, knocking it down to 90 for 2026, that was not based on just the fact that I didn't meet 2025's yearly reading challenge. Kind of the last couple of months of 2025, especially October, November, December, I was reading a lot more near the end of September, going into October. And I was reading a lot more, but I was just starting to pick up my reading again. I've noticed my habits are, I tend to read a lot at the beginning of the year, the first fourth of the year, so January, February, March, and then I read a lot the last fourth, so October, November, December, and I read a lot during those chunks of time. But at the same time, I had other hobbies going on, so I had I have my crochet. I'm trying to get back into knitting again, or practicing, but I'm also doing that. And some of the audiobooks that I'm leaning towards are on the longer side, so those are taking longer, and then also just longer books. some of the longer books. Like, let me pull one out. For example, Malice. I started trying to read this, I think, September, October-ish, and then I did a soft DNF of this because ideally I like it. I really like the author's world building, his characters, the setting. But it just, when I was trying to read it, I just wasn't in the mood for a lengthy book. So I did a soft DNF of this with the intention to return to it. But if I'm reading longer books, that's obviously going to take longer. And also, too, it's like I'm not going to be as focused on reading other books while I'm reading that one book. Because I noticed that for me, when I read too many books at once, then that's what gets me into a reading slump. And I think I talked about that in my January 2026 book tag, the Reading Slump book tag. If I have too many books going on at once, I usually try to have an audiobook and then a physical book. And if I have too many books going on at once, it doesn't matter the format. If there's too many, then that's what gets me into a reading slump. But kind of getting back on track, like if I'm focusing on one lengthier book, I'm not going to focus on too many other books. Like even if I have an audiobook, I'm going to try to be finishing up that book. So there's that. So that's going to take me a little bit longer, and then that might impact how the rest of the year goes. So that's why it's like, if it's not something I succeed or I fail at, it's also something I base it off the previous year. So it's like, if I'm taking a little bit longer to read stuff, like I might knock the number down, or if I'm reading stuff a lot quicker, I might bump the number up. It really depends on the vibes and how things are going, and then also just life happens. So it's like, I'm not always going to have the same amount of time each week, month, year. I'm not going to have the same amount of time to dedicate to reading. So that's why I really do base it off of the previous year. Again, not just numerically like how many books I read, but also just based off of vibes and how things are going. So the third thing is that I try to keep on top of my physical books, in the sense of I try to read them soon after buying. And I know that's kind of a foreign concept. I've always been pretty good about doing that, just because I get pretty excited about reading the books I'm buying. Heaven Official's Blessing is a slight deviation from that, but just because I was trying to buy the full series so I could do the read through for the reading vlog. But I try to keep on top of my physical books that I own. Like I mentioned, basically reading them soon after I buy them, or trying to read them soon after I buy them. And then if I'm not feeling it, if I DNF it, I have to decide if it's something I'm gonna do a soft DNF of, or I want to try it again, or if it's just a hard DNF and I have to get rid of it. And then that way, a large part of that for me is space, but also part of it is that at least I know that a majority of these books are read and I don't have to worry about that. And then moving on to the next point, that allows me to focus more on borrowing more books from my local library, from the Libby app, from the Hoopla app. Lets me focus on borrowing more books and maybe like diversifying a little bit more. And diversifying in the sense of like these are books that I probably wouldn't have picked up. Like, let's see, I have 2 books that I'm returning to the library soon. Well, I have 4 books technically. I'm just trying to grab 2 of them. So there are these 2 books. I ended up borrowing these because I looked up a list of books by Indigenous authors. So there's Sisters of the Lost Nation by Nick Medina, and then A Council of Dolls by Mona Susan Power. And I wouldn't have picked these up if I didn't look for them, and it probably would have taken me a little while to buy them. So borrowing from the library was like the perfect little segue, and I have been trying to borrow more from my local library, so this was like the perfect little segue for that point. And also just the perfect opportunity to just read more books. I needed to fix it. There we go. It was a perfect opportunity to have access to other books that I haven't really seen at my local bookstores, and also that I just wouldn't have known about previously if I hadn't looked it up and then borrowed it from my local library. And then The next one that I try to do is I try to focus more on favorite authors, because those books, if it's a favorite author, if it's an auto by author, there's a higher chance that I'll like their work and then I'll actually finish it. So I try to focus on more favorite authors, so that way I at least have a 75 to 100% chance of finishing it, of enjoying it, and actually enjoying the books that I'm reading, because that's something I talk about a lot on this channel, is that it's okay to DNF if you're not enjoying a book. Like, reading for many of us is a hobby, even if you're like even if you're a book influencer on YouTube, on Instagram, like, there is still some form of an element of a hobby to reading. Sorry, I just have to turn down my ring light because it gets pretty bright at times. So there is still some element of enjoyment, even if it is more of a career for you. There is still some form of enjoyment that you have to get in some form of hobby that you do with reading, because there are books that you read for whatever your social media is. If you're a bookish influencer, there are the books you read for that, but there are also books that you're going to be reading more for enjoyment. So there is that need to focus on, like, for me at least, to focus more on favorite authors, because life's too short. I mean, I'm still pretty young, but like, life's too short to be spending time reading books you don't like and forcing myself to read books I'm not gonna like, or authors that have burned me like 2-3 times that I'm like, I can't read another book from them. So it's like a focus on favorite authors and favorite genres even. So there's that. Okay, and then the next one is continuing series, specifically series I enjoy. So if you look at Heaven Official's Blessing and The Apothecary Diaries, Yashahime, Magic Knight Rare, even though I finished that, Delicious in Dungeon. So it's like The Remarried Empress, Perks of Being an S-Class Heroine, Villains Are Destined to Die. Like, focusing on series and continuing series, especially the ones that you like, I feel like that's so important, because, like, again, you're guaranteed to at least get some level of enjoyment from it. Like, did I like the ending of Fruits Basket? I'll have to reread that. I feel like I should do like a series of like manga rereads once I have like the full series for some of these. Magic Knight Rare, I was okay with the ending for. I can't remember Fruits Basket. Inuyasha, I was okay with the ending for. Those are the only ones I can really think of. It's more so the anime endings that I had an issue with rather than manga. But anyway, so like continuing series, because like I said, you're going to have more of a guarantee of enjoying it, even if you're not super happy with the ending. There was still some enjoyment from reading it and completing it, you know. So continuing and completing series. And then the next one, kind of related, is that if I start a series by an author, then I have an eye on another series by that same author, I have to finish the first series. So best example for this is Heaven Official's Blessing. So I have not finished the series yet, but I have my eye on. Oh, I still have a bookmark in here. Oh no, I put it in here. Never mind. I put it in there just to have the correct bookmark character. I have my eye on Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation, Modao Juchi. I have my eye on this one, and I have read this first volume, just as to kind of test the waters. But before I can really commit to and invest in the series, I have to finish Heaven Official's Blessing. And then it would kind of be the same thing, where it's like, before I start another series by the author, I have to do Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation. So it's that kind of a deal where it's like, just part of it's just like the commitment for me, just making sure I finish it, especially for like some of these series that are finished. Just making sure I finish it, just so I can have that satisfaction. And that also adds to the yearly reading challenge, especially for some of these longer series. Like Yashahime is 10 volumes. I don't know how many Apothecary Diaries is. Delicious in Dungeon is 14. Don't know how many Fruits. I don't know what the amount is for Fruits Basket or Inuyasha or the other ones. Magic Nightmare, there's 6 in total. Heaven Official's Blessing, there's 8. So that adds a good amount to the reading challenge, no matter what the year is. So no matter which year it's for, like, it'll add a decent amount. So starting, like, making sure I complete a series by an author before I start another series by that same author, or kind of even within the same vein. It doesn't have to be by the same author, but just making sure I finish a series before I commit to another longer series. So the next one, this might sound a little bit weird, but I am going to explain it. I didn't explain it down below in the description for a reason, is that DNFs count towards the goal. And like I said down below in the description, it's not in the way you might think. So it counts towards the goal, not in the sense of counting towards how many books I've read because it's a DNF, but it counts towards the goal in the sense of a sense of completion and a sense of satisfaction of being like, hey, I set this book down. I was not super pleased with it. I set it down for whatever reason. I can move on, in the sense, like I said, in the sense of satisfaction, in a sense of some semblance of completion. So that's how it counts towards the reading goal. So the 9th one, there's 10 in total, so this is the second to last one. The 9th one is that rereads count towards the reading goal, and this is with the caveat that of as long as it's not in the same year. So for example, Heaven Official's Blessing. If I were to do a reread of that, let's say I read like the first 4 volumes in 2026. If I were to start doing if I were to start doing a reread in 2026, and I've read all 8 volumes 2026, I cannot, like, and then I would, okay, let me reset this. I read Heaven Official's Blessing 2026, and I were to start a reread of it. Whatever books I reread in 2026, those don't count towards my yearly reading challenge. However, if I read Heaven Official's Blessing in 2026 and then reread them in 2027, the 2027 rereads would count towards the reading goal. Now, to take another example, The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. I read those once a year, and those count towards the reading goals. And I usually read those towards the beginning of the year, just to, it sounds kind of weird, but to get it out of the way, to make sure I've read it, because that's something I'm trying to do for myself, from kind of part of my mental health, just reading it once a year. So I try to do it at the beginning so I know I've read it. If I were to read it like a second or third time within that same year, then the second or third time does not count, but that first time each year at the beginning of the year counts. So whenever I read it in 2026, counts for 2026. Anytime after that first time in 2026 does not count. So rereads count as long as it's the first time I'm rereading it for that specific year, or the first time I'm reading it for that specific year, even if it's a reread. I don't remember when I first read The Hobbit. It was years ago though. So anyway, the 10th and last one is that I'm trying to go fully with the vibes of everything, and basically kind of like what I was saying earlier, based on like how the previous year was, based on what I'm feeling. Like, sometimes I'm not going to want to finish a series, and that's okay. I can DNF it, I can read it later, like I can shuffle stuff around. I just go fully with the vibes, because at the end of the day, my reading habits are my own, and they're not hurting anyone else. And I know that I try to read as diversely as possible from authors of various backgrounds and various upbringings. So I try to read diversely and keep myself educated and informed, and my reading habits, like I said, don't hurt anyone else. So I go with the vibes, and I try not to let other people's reading habits affect my own, because at the end of the day, like, that not everything that works for one person will work for a second person. It won't work for me. What works for me might not work for the next person. So I just go fully with the vibes. So that is the end of this video. If you want to leave your thoughts down below in the comments, I'd love to have a discussion about this. Again, this is like just for me personally. I'm not trying to like convert anyone to this way of viewing the yearly reading challenge or defining it. Like, this is just my personal way of doing it. Maybe this will help some people, maybe it won't, but at the end of the day, it's like, I figured we could talk about it. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video.